All right. The red light is on, and we are ready to talk about free agency. Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa. Joining me today, we have the wonderful recurring guest now, Uber Hansen. So thank you for joining. And I got Josh McCarty of Bill's Chat joining us as well. Josh, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Happy to have you aboard, man. And again, thank you all of you for listening, tuning in, hating, whatever it may be. We're happy to have you here on our stream today. We're going to be talking about free agency. And we're going to be talking about not only just who the Bills could potentially target, but really just going through the list of who we have here as free agents this season and whether they're staying, whether they're walking, just some of our predictions coming ahead in the turbulent times that are going to be occurring next week. Now, I started it off by the list here, the pending Bills free agents. I think it's only right that we talk about the two biggest pending free agents, and anyone else that we think is of note on this list, we can go to as well. But I want to start off the conversation with the one and only Tremaine Edmunds, perhaps the most polarizing potential free agent on the Bills list. The contract evaluations have been kind of all over the place. We've seen 15 million. I've heard people say 21 million. Now, I think he's going to be on the higher side of the linebacker market. And when you talk about how much money you might invest into Tremaine Edmunds, I think it's worth discussing if you feel that's worth investing into or not. So, gentlemen, Josh, I'll actually start with you as our special guest today. What do you think about Tremaine Edmunds staying or going?
At this point, I still think it's a true 50-50. And I think you hit on the most important part there. This is not a conversation of whether Tremaine Edmunds is a good football player or not. I think he's provably a very good football player. It really does come down to the value of an off-ball linebacker. And when you look at the deal that Roquan Smith got last year from the Ravens, 20 million APY, there's just not a lot of data points that tell you that's a good investment for an off-ball linebacker. And I think right now that has to be what the Bills are juggling with. If the report from earlier this week is true and his market is going to be closer to 15, I would have to imagine it's better odds that he stays with the Bills. But I just find it hard to believe that months after Roquan Smith signs a 20 million APY, that Edmunds would sign 75% of that.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, Josh. I'd be absolutely shocked if he signed for 15. The second I saw the Roquan Smith deal, I said Tremaine's going to sign the same deal, if not more. If you think about it this way, Roquan Smith is a better linebacker than Tremaine Edmunds. Like if I could pick between the two, I'm taking Roquan over Tremaine. But at the same time, Roquan got traded to the Ravens. He signed a contract with the Ravens. He never hit free agency, so he never had bidders. Tremaine's going to have bidders during this entire process. There's not just going to be one team looking at him. There's going to be many teams looking at him. He's going to take the best contract. I think he goes pretty fairly easily over 20 million. The team that I think is actually going to get him is one that made a splash yesterday, and that's the Chicago Bears. I think the Bears are going to take Tremaine and they're going to say, hey, we flipped Roquan for a second, a fifth, and Tremaine Edmunds.
I definitely could see that. I think it's tough for me because I love Edmonds' game. I think the Bills' defense and the way it's constructed has a very high amount of praise and value in a coverage linebacker, and Edmonds might be, if not the best, one of the best in the league. Just his range, his length of his arms makes it so much more difficult to throw over the middle of the field. And this past season, especially in Edmonds' contract year, go figure, you saw the drop off on this Bills defense in the middle of the field when Edmonds wasn't there. So that's my justification for potentially keeping him. However, I agree with you both. One, he's not going to take 75% of what Roquan's making. And two, 20 million into a linebacker is tricky for me because while I love Edmonds and his game, I do think if you were to allocate those resources and that money to the rest of your defense, potentially your defensive line, especially with some of the names in this market, you could actually make your future cheaper free agent or draft picks life a lot easier by making your pass rush more premier, by shoring up with some free agents, making the run defense more tight by getting some D tackles if there are any good ones on this market. And then all of a sudden, your line is stout. There's penetration in both the run and the pass, and your middle linebacker isn't fighting for his life out there because they're not asking him to do too much because the expectation isn't for that because you don't have Tremaine Edmunds anymore. So with that in mind, I've been flip-flopping on it, but I definitely think there's more justification for Edmunds to go and just get his money that he rightfully deserves, I should add, than retain him, put all this money into that position and be handcuffed, even though the free agency market isn't the best it's been in years past. So I do agree with you both. And moving on, we got to talk about Jordan Poyer, another polarizing free agent, commander of the secondary. He's been excellent for the Bills the past few years. It is a shame that he, in my opinion, he might be walking. I do have some thoughts on him potentially staying, but before I go down that road, what are your guys' take on Jordan Poyer?
I'm probably about 80% that he goes at this point. I get the feeling that maybe the relationship, the bridge there is a little bit burned. Not that he's mad at the Bills or upset about his time with the Bills. I think maybe ego might be the bad word there, but he is an all-pro player. He's played at a very high level, and I think maybe respect is the right word. And the fact that he hasn't gotten that top of the market deal from the Bills during his time here is a respect thing for him. I don't expect him to necessarily break the bank in free agency. I think when the numbers come out wherever he does sign, it'll be a deal that Bills fans will look at and say, we couldn't give him that. But I truly do feel like a fresh start is maybe something he even wants. Miami isn't a team we have heard a lot about. I would not rule out a team like the Chiefs, the Eagles, especially if they lose their starting safety. So I think right now it seems very unlikely that Poyer's back.
Yeah, Josh, I'm with you again 100% on this, that I think a lot of this is going to come down to, and ego has like this negative connotation, right? Like you say ego, you seem to be saying that players kind of has an issue. I don't think that's the case. I think that Jordan Poyer kind of looks at the situation like, hey, they could have extended me last year. They didn't. They chose to let me test free agency. Or get to this point where my contract's up. Well, they don't want me necessarily here. I'm going to go see if I'm more wanted somewhere else. Add to that and I know this is kind of a hot topic or an issue-based topic, but the taxes are a real thing. I forgot the name of the defensive back from the Giants yesterday talk about it. He said it's a topic that almost every player talks about when signing a new contract is the taxes here are more than here. The cost of living is more here than here. If New York State's taking 10% off of 8 games that he plays, like that's 10% of his money that he could go somewhere else and not have to deal with that. That's why Miami constantly gets brought up. I don't think that Poyer signs with the Bills. I want him back really bad. I love Jordan Poyer. I have a jersey in the other room of Jordan Poyer's. But let's say some team offers him 10 million and then Bills came and they're like, hey, we'll offer you 10 million too. I think he chooses to go somewhere else because of that aforementioned ego. I will say one thing, Miami keeps getting thrown around over and over and over again. I don't get the whole Miami hype. I think people heard the tax talk, heard Florida doesn't have the income tax, and that's where they connected Miami. Miami has Brandon Jones and Javon Holland, who are both very good safeties that they're super high on. I had Dolphins fans last year telling me that Brandon Jones and Javon Holland were a better safety duo than Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. So if they truly think that and they want to go invest, $10 million a year in Jordan Poyer, it doesn't really make much sense to me. I think you could look at Jacksonville, as a competitor. I don't think Poyer wants to go to some terrible team and like not compete this year. So I'd say Jacksonville, and then the dark horse, and it depends on who they get at quarterback. But Las Vegas, people keep bringing up too. I don't think we see Poyer back in a Bills jersey unless that is Micah Hyde gets a hold of him and says, "Come on, one last ride."
Yeah, and I definitely could see that outcome. I'm not confident that he comes back for all those reasons mentioned. For him to deliberately bring up the income tax factor is huge to me because that's definitely been something that's weighing on his mind, especially in a contract year where he's 32 years old. He's only getting older. His time playing in the NFL is coming to an end at some point, and it's probably going to be soon, especially with the mileage that he has and the injuries that he's faced this past season. So for him to bring that up unprompted tells me that he wants that bag. And I think he's more than deserving of getting his money with the level of play he's had for the Bills the past couple of years, the leadership he shows. I'm all for Jordan Poyer getting paid. So if he does walk and goes to a team that's going to give him 12 million, 13 million, whatever it may be, so be it. I'd be happy for him. And I think the team, in my gut feeling with no basis on this whatsoever, is preparing for it. They really did have the contingency plan at safety kind of set before everything went down this past season, with Hyde and Hamlin essentially being the duo that was supposed to take over. Now there's more uncertainty, rightfully so. But I also have some suspicions about Poyer coming back. And the reason I do is because I feel like the market is tricky. It's hard to predict. With Poyer and his age and his mileage, like I said before, I kind of see an outcome where teams are a little more concerned with giving him that much money, especially for a short-term contract, because he's not getting a 6 or 7 year deal where you're spreading this money out. He just had a lateral meniscus tear. He had elbow issues, and he played still above average despite it. But this is kind of the concern I would have as a GM, where we want this veteran safety to come in and command the defense and be a leader and help us get to that playoff push or over the hump if they're already a playoff team. But is he going to last the season? And that's where I have concerns about it for a different team, where I think there might be some benefit to the familiarity of coming back to Buffalo, even if it is still 10 million, but for 2 years, you get 20 mil, however much guaranteed money. You know the system. You can trust that you would be a starter. You know the medical staff. You have familiarity to a point where if the money isn't that much higher elsewhere, I feel like it's not outlandish to say Poyer could come back. So I'm not sure
Yeah.
if you guys agree with that.
Well, to your point on the big contract extension, right? He's not going to get 6 years, 5 years. I think the max he's going to get on an extension, like a true max, would be 3 years. You might see something like, oh, a 5-year contract, but it's 2 years of dead. Like it's a 3-year contract. And I just pulled up Harrison Smith's contract for the Vikings, and this is a guy I comp Poyer to a lot, just because Harrison Smith signed his contract extension at the age of 32, which Poyer currently is, and the Vikings fans, I mean, Harrison Smith has played very well, but his contract's starting to get a little bit wonky. Like this year, he'll have a $19 million cap hit with an $11.8 million dead cap. So they're starting to get into an issue now where they have this older safety. He'll be 34 this year. And, Poyer style play, like he likes to thump, like he likes to hit people. He's not like a Micah Hyde who plays more cerebral and is like over the field and really goes for the legs. Like Poyer's going to come down and lay a lick on you. I think that wears on your body at some point. Poyer does have, I think, a little bit more tread than most, because early in his career, he's a special teams player that really wasn't getting much field time. He had that lacerated kidney in his last year with the Browns, and then he came to Buffalo and was an absolute stud. For Poyer to come back, Joe, you make a really good point. Like he does have familiarity here. He's been here for a while now. To just uproot your career and go somewhere else, he wants the money. I really think it's going to come down to money, just because this is going to be his last contract. He wants money that for the rest of his life he's set, his kids are set, his family's set, and I just don't know if the Bills can match a contract. It all depends on the market, though. Who knows? Maybe the top offer gets $8 million a year, and the Bills are like, oh yeah, we'll give you that.
Yeah.
I think if you want to talk yourself into Poyer coming back, and this also could be an Edmonds conversation, is when you look at this really being Sean McDermott's first year of truly calling the defense, Jordan Poyer and Tremaine Edmonds are really two quarterbacks on the field for that defense, and they would be such tremendous assets for Sean McDermott when he's going to be already juggling a lot as being defensive play caller, head coach. Does he want to let two of those key cogs to the defense out the door that he could rely on so much on game day with familiarity with the system? But Joe, I think you hit on another really key point, though. It almost makes you feel bad for Poyer with the injuries he dealt with this year after being such a reliable player throughout the beginning part of his Bills career. And by the end of the year, I mean, for lack of a better term, they were really holding him together with duct tape. He was not the best version of himself. He was literally doing everything he could do to get on the field, including taking a car to Kansas City because he wasn't cleared to fly.
Yeah.
And it just leaves you feeling bad for him. And as a Bills fan, you want to keep your guy, but just as a fan of Poyer, I find myself just hoping he finds somehow, some way the bag somewhere. And if that means he gets rich as a Miami Dolphin, I will hate to see him in the uniform, but there will be a big part of me that's just happy for him and his family.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, his dedication to play, despite the injuries, should be a positive for him being a free agent and for a GM to see that. Like if there's one message I want to get taken away, if he even sees this, I don't know if he will. I love Jordan Poyer. I love his game. I want him to get the money he deserves. I'm just wondering if that's going to be in Buffalo or elsewhere. But given his commitment and given the fact that he will put his body on the line for the game, that is a net positive for any team, no matter where he goes. And, if he goes to Miami, all I ask is for this fan base to just realize that even though it is a division rival, he still deserves the love. He gave us everything over these past few years. Like, I'm not going to see Jordan Poyer signs with Miami tomorrow if that does happen and be like, wow, he's the worst. Like, no, come on, man. It's a game. This guy has a family to feed, and he's a great safety who wants his bag. Let him get his bag, even if that is with the cursed fish from the southern hemisphere. All right. So anyways, moving on to some other free agents on this list. What do you guys – I said this list in our notes, and it's basically every free agent that the Bills are expecting to have this year. This was post-Bacher, so we know he's coming back. But there's some names on this list that I'm interested in potentially bringing back on cheap deals. Some people may disagree. The two on here that I want to start with are Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson. Now, Phillips pre-labrum tear, and I want everyone to understand, like, that man was playing with one shoulder, was obviously not himself when he got hurt. When he was healthy in the beginning of the year, He was a force. The pressure was great. He was present. You saw him every single game that he was healthy. I would love to bring him back knowing that he's put together again. And with Shaq Lawson, it was more of the same. He felt like he back in his natural element. Like that dog in him, the pressure he was showing on the edge was there. He was a force in the run game. I would like to have these guys back on cheaper deals. Do you think both come back? Do you think they don't, or one or the other?
I think Phillips is probably about a coin flip, and it's unfortunate to say about Shaq Lawson, but I don't think they're probably going to bring him back, only from the standpoint of when you look at that defensive end room, you have Basham, Epinesa, Rousseau, Miller, and then if you bring back Shaq Lawson, you really are running it back with the same group that by the end of the year looked like needed to be improved upon. And with Shaq Lawson being an unrestricted free agent, that is the one area that the Bills could try to upgrade, whether it's in free agency or the draft. As far as Phillips goes, I hear everything you're saying. There are times when you watch him and you are just like, wow, if he could just channel that, he could be one of the best defensive tackles in the league. But the truth about him is he is just such an inconsistent football player, not only from effort on play to play, injury history since his breakout year in 2019. You mentioned he had 1.5 sacks opening day, and then that was the last time he got the quarterback to the ground. Did have some really bad injuries. You guys watched the tape. By the end of the year, it was unfair watching him try to rush the passer with one arm. If you can get him back cheaply to the point where you're not relying on him, and maybe he goes into camp as your 4th defensive tackle, and anything you get out of him as a bonus, great. But outside of that, I think that it might be best to move on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to differ here a little bit. I'd like them both back on cheap deals. Like, look, Shaq was I think essentially vet minimum last year, and I think they got a good amount out of Shaq. Jordan Phillips was a little bit more. I can't remember the exact number, if it was 5 or 8 million. I think if they brought Jordan Phillips back this year, it'd be even less. Same, and Shaq would still be around the minimum. My thing is, both of these players are worth more to on the Bills than they are on any other team. Like, they both play their best football in Buffalo. That's been proven. Like, Shaq didn't do so well when he left. Jordan Phillips didn't do so well. So I don't really think either of them are going to have a market outside of Buffalo. Phillips is also getting older too. I think he's 31, 32 years old. So that even reduces his market. That being said, it is a really good point that, like, the defensive line by the end of the year was not playing good football. A lot of that did have to do with Von Miller getting hurt. And in the final game of the season, you even lose Daquan Jones, who's probably their 2nd best defensive lineman. The one thing I think, and I'm going to kind of keep a lookout here for the next few days and maybe even today, I'm not going to be stunned if the Bills make a trade on the defensive line, either at the interior or exterior of the defensive line. I could see them try to flip Boogie Basham, try to flip AJ Epinesa, try to flip Ed Oliver. Like, one of those players moves, and that'll kind of give you an indication. Like, if you see the Bills say, we're trading Ed Oliver, who incidentally just a few days ago put out something on his Instagram like, I don't want to talk unless you show me the money. And if that's the case, that message seems to signify to me that maybe the Bills did offer him a contract, and he's like, no, that's way too low. And at that point, it might be like, all right, if we can flip him for a pick or two, like, we can free up 10 million cap space, and maybe you bring back Jordan Phillips, so you kind of get a reduction in cap there, and you also get a pick in the process. You kind of take that and see where you go from there. So I'll say this: Jordan Phillips, Shaq Lawson, I could see both back. Let's say their cap hit last year combined was $6 million. If you get that closer to $4 million for those two players, yeah, I'll sign up for it.
Yeah, I agree with you both. Cheap deals is definitely the priority, only just because, like, at his best, Phillips, again, is great, but he wasn't playing at his best, and that was also from injury, the inconsistency of trying to play through injury, which greatly affected his game. Lawson played well for the money he was making. I wouldn't be totally surprised if he thinks he's deserving of more. He had a good season for what he was getting paid. Maybe he tries to test the market out, see if he can get a couple more mil for, a team that might be just, big in salary cap, able to splurge a little bit more, even on the lower, end where players aren't getting paid 20 million a year, but these guy wants 2 million instead of 1, or 3 instead of 1. Like, let's give him 3. Sure. Why not? And, if he gets it, I'm happy for him. But Shaq's been a pro since he got back to Buffalo. He's been great to watch. I love Shaq Lawson. I was excited when we picked him. Obviously, he's not getting you 15 sacks a year, but his role in this this defense was great. So you bring up the Ed Oliver potential trade. I think everyone in this fan base got riled up yesterday because they saw the proposed trade with Jeffrey Simmons and Daquan Jones posting the picture, which, by the way, when we're talking about Bills Twitter accounts, like Bills players Twitter accounts, these guys got to know what they're doing. Like they got to know that they're stirring the pot up and getting us all riled up. But that thought of like trading Ed, potentially for, more draft picks involved with that and then getting a Simmons would be unreal. I do agree that I think they're going to make some sort of trade. I don't know what it will be, but if I had to look at the candidates to move, it would be him only just because of the guaranteed money. I just hope that if they do move Ed Oliver, it's either getting more capital in return where you can supplement his loss with like maybe 2 D tackles in the draft, or trading straight up for a premier defensive tackle. But you have to give up some assets, but that hole is still filled. That would be my only concern, especially with a Gabe Davis potential trade too. That's another worry I have is, sure, you could trade Davis. Who's replacing Davis? Is it going to be in the draft? Is it going to be another free agent? Like, what are your guys' thoughts on not even just Ed or Gabe, but like any potential trades that we might do and how we would fill that role?
I'm a big fan of trading Ed Oliver, and it really is not a knock on Ed Oliver. I think we can all agree that Ed Oliver is a pretty good football player. It just, you stop short of saying great with him. And the 10.7 is really the whole key here. It's the 5th-year option. That money is basically set aside in the corner. There's no flexibility there unless you extend him. And I don't think the Bills are at the point right now where they want to give him a top of the market defensive tackle extension. So the question becomes, what can you get for him? Well, the rest of the league has seen his production or lack thereof at times, and they see that 10.7 figure. So any idea that Brandon Beane's going to go out there and get a first or a second round pick for Ed Oliver, that's just not going to happen. I think on the surface, any trade involving Ed Oliver would be tough to stomach for Bills fans. And it would probably be a day 3 pick. And it's like, wow, we just gave away Ed Oliver, but it really is trading him for $10.7 million in cap space that you can then spread out and fill 2 or 3 holes, because that 10.7 that is locked up with Ed Oliver, Von Miller only counted 5.5 million against the cap last year because you can spread out a long-term deal however you want. That 10.7 that's locked for Ed is so inflexible. You could legitimately get Poyer and Edmonds back if you wanted to with just that money, if you really backload those deals. So just for the flexibility it would provide, I understand the conversation about you're just creating another hole. My issue is I don't know how big the hole is, because I think Ed Oliver is an above average-ish defensive tackle, and I can find similar production for a lot cheaper value.
Yeah, Josh is just speaking to me today, like in my head right now. Yeah, I think one thing, like Bills fans, have this obsession, like, okay, we could trade Ed Oliver, like maybe we get a second round pick for him. Like we'll go for it. No, there's no freaking way you're getting a second round pick for Ed Oliver. Whoever takes him has to take that cap hit, so that's going to eat up a lot of your ability to actually make more moves. Like, I think about it this way: who are you going to trade him to? You're going to trade him to a competitor, or like somebody that's competing, trying to win a title. If you're going to trade him there, like you're not going to get a player in return. Like you're going to trade him there and you're going to get a late round draft pick. Are you going to trade him to a team that's rebuilding? Like, why would a team that's rebuilding want him for 1 year, for a 1 year deal, and then you have to extend him afterwards? He's of little value because he's on the last year of his deal. He's played decent football, not elite football. Like I just, day 3 pick is the best you're going to get for him. And when I say day 3 pick, I'm not even talking round 4. I'm talking round 5. Maybe round 6. And I think a lot of Bills fans would see that if the Bills ever did that and say, well, why the heck did we trade him then? And what it is that cap flexibility. If you can get $10 million off the books and, like I said earlier, replace him with Jordan Phillips, let's say, the production isn't going to be drastically different. I think Ed Oliver's better than Jordan Phillips, but that $10 million is so valuable to this team that's so cap strapped right now. That's the reason the Bills would want to trade him. And you have to find a partner that's willing to say, like, hey, yeah, we'll take Ed. Maybe he has some like crazy upside. We have a bunch of picks. We'll give you a 5th round pick, maybe mid 5th round. And you guys see what you can do with that draft pick.
Yeah, and listen, like Ed is still, I want to stress, like I like Ed Oliver. I think he can be a good player. Uber, in the Reddit thread, there was, and I mentioned this in our chat, there was a really interesting comment on Ed Oliver that I've honestly taken in, and like it's been the best way to describe him. He's the 3rd best D tackle on the team, but he's the best D tackle on the team. And it was like, it's like a galaxy brain statement, which is so funny because it doesn't sound like it makes any sense. But when he is not double teamed, when he is one-on-one with somebody, he's great. He's disruptive. He's going to stop the run. He's going to get to the quarterback, at least hurry them up, cause pressure. The problem is with this D-line, it was so fickle that when someone got hurt that took that double team off of him and it came to him, he can't get through it. And it was tough to watch just because, like, I think Ed's got one of the highest motors on the team. I'll never question Ed Oliver's work ethic. I'll never question his ability. My concern is when you watch him get doubled up, for someone who was picked where he was picked, it seems like the circumstances have to be perfect on the rest of the line for him to be that stud D tackle. And that's too much of a demand for me to justify giving him a guaranteed 10 mil. If a team can bring him in with a better D line, or maybe, a team that is going to surround him with premier draft talent because they have a lot of picks in hand, maybe a Chicago Bears, I could see him thriving elsewhere. I just feel like with the current state of the Bills system, with the fact that teams kind of prepare for that 4-man rush by just double teaming whoever they think is the most disruptive, by getting the ball out quickly, I just feel like the time for him to show who he is would happen on a different team, not in Buffalo. And that's why I don't think I would give him 10 mil and why I do support the trade of him. And I wish him all the best if he does get moved. Like, when someone says, show me the money, I'm very pro athlete getting their bag. And I think that's absolutely, man. Like, listen, these guys put their bodies on the line for most of the year. Like, when someone wants to get paid, I'm all for you getting paid. If it just can't be with the team that we root for, then so be it. I wish you the best elsewhere. Another interesting name that is on this list, because I know in your pod yesterday, Josh, you brought up some running back options, but Devin Singletary is going to be a free agent. Devin Singletary, when used, I should have pulled up his yards per carry. I don't know if either of you guys know it off the top of your head, but he was effective. The problem is, he's a free agent. He's walking into a market that is saturated with a capital S. Even though Barkley got the tag, there's a ton of running backs in this market that are not going to be making as much as they probably thought they were, because not only do you have that, but a draft that has talent in there. I am not going to be shocked if Singletary comes back for a very team-friendly deal. What do you guys think?
So this is kind of one of those divisions of what I think the Bills will do and what I would do. I'm with you. I think it's very likely, if not probable, that Devin Singletary goes out there, tests the market. It's a game of musical chairs. Running backs like David Montgomery, maybe even Alexander Madison get signed, and he's left without a team. And then the Bills are like, hey, come back to us on a 2-year, $2 million APY deal. Personally, as much as I like what Singletary has done at times, I want to see the Bills reshape their running back room. I think there's been some instances where you've seen examples of this Bills team really try to go more to like a zone heavy running scheme. And the one thing that holds them back is Singletary really thrives in more of a pin and pull running scheme. And I want to see some more juice there. I want to see more of a between the tackles complement to James Cook. And I think there are some cheap options in free agency. I think you can always find that in the draft. So I understand if he comes back really cheap, what harm is it? But I would stop short of being excited of essentially running it back with the same running back room.
Yeah, I'm an outspoken fan of Devin Singletary's. I love Devin Singletary. I think he's super, super underrated. I kind of push this stat all the time. Since he was drafted, he's one of 4 players to finish every single season with 950 scrimmage yards and 25 catches. I think it's Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, and Dalvin Cook are the other 3. So it's him with those 3, and those 3 are pretty dang good. But saying that, like, I don't think the Bills are ever going to have a good rush, like a great rushing attack. I know fans are clamoring for that. You see the rumors of Derrick Henry and people are going bananas about that. I just don't see the value in it. Like, Josh Allen is such a stud. I want him having 45 touches a game. Like, I don't want to take 10 touches away from Josh Allen, start giving it to running backs. I'm not interested in that. So when it comes to moving on from Devin Singletary, I think there's a benefit to bringing him back. I think there's a benefit to letting him walk. James Cook looked really good at the end of the season last year. And like Josh said, you can find players at the end of the draft. Like, the Bills, in reality, they don't have a 7th round pick. They could take their 6th round pick. They could trade down, get a pick late, maybe 2 picks in the 7th round. Try to hit on a running back like Isaiah Pacheco. See if you can hit on one, like a power back that could complement James Cook. That's super, super cheap. Devin Singletary, to me, though, I think he ends up leaving Buffalo. I would take him back, but I think he leaves. I think he's going to go to Miami. I just have this feeling he's going to go to Miami. He's going to fit that team well. You have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle on the outside, and you got this little scat back of Devin Singletary that can make people miss in the phone booth. It's going to cause some issues if he goes to Miami. I really want to play him, twice a year with the way that offense is built.
There is
Yeah.
I'm sorry. There's a
Go for it.
comment in chat about Josh Love Singletary, and I think that is important.
Yeah.
Every time Josh Allen has had an opportunity to speak about Devin Singletary, he goes out of his way to compliment him and talk about the trust he has in him and how he's always where he's supposed to be. And that is not nothing. And when you have a franchise quarterback like Josh Allen, who we know has a say in certain personnel moves and certain coaching moves, that's not going to be lost on Brandon Beane when it comes to, do you want to bring back Devin Singletary on a team-friendly deal?
And Bean, I think Bean said in his end of year press conference that Devin Singletary is like one of the kindest, best people he knows, and that really perked up my ears. I'm like, why would you're saying that about a guy that's going to be an unrestricted free agent? There's a reason you're saying that. Either you're trying to benefit him, help him get the money somewhere else, or you want him back. And to Josh's point, like when it comes to like Josh Allen trusts Devin Singletary, and trust is a huge part of Josh Allen's game. Why'd they bring back Cole Beasley and John Brown last year? Because Josh didn't trust the guys that he was throwing the ball to, so they had to go get him two guys that he did trust. So if there truly is this trust factor, and Josh calls Brandon Beane today and says, "Hey, I want Motor back," well, then Motor's going to be a Bill next year.
Brandon, fetch me my running back, please.
Yeah.
It's literally the case. And a couple thoughts. One, you can get Singletary back for cheap. If they do, I'm happy with it. Two, I don't think that eliminates them from taking a running back in the draft. I've said it so many times to Uber, and I said it on the Monday show we did with David. I said it in the chat. I've said it a billion times in Spaces. Getting a rookie running back who can be a plug-and-play player on this team when it's needed will be so valuable because of the team control you have with him. If you don't like Deontay Foreman, King Henry, all these guys that people mentioned, like, they are great running backs. They are talented. They are people that I certainly would not be opposed to having on this team. But imagine getting someone who can replicate those numbers on a team that is going to throw the ball a lot this season and use Allen as a running back for nothing. That $2 million, $1 million is now spread out over years. And let's say Singletary doesn't come back and Bijan Robinson is the person that you do bring in. I hope he enjoyed his porterhouse with the organization the other night, or maybe, pasta. I don't know what he likes. We'll find out when he gets drafted. Kidding. Maybe not. Then you got this guy for 4, maybe 5 years if they pick up the option for nothing. And he is a plug and play starter that could be one of the best backs in the league, and you don't have to pay him. And if you're talking about a Super Bowl window with Josh Allen, which I think the window is always open with Allen as your quarterback, and you give him this back who's now not getting paid a crap ton of money, all of a sudden teams are changing the way they game plan for you. The scheming changes. Everything gets better in that regard. So while I think Singletary might come back, I don't think it eliminates them from taking one in the draft. I also don't think it's outlandish to say they don't bring Singletary back, and that's the view they go for. I do want to move on to some of our targets, but before I do, is there any last name you see on this list that maybe you two were interested in talking about at all? Maybe someone you think is more polarizing than we lead on, someone that could come back or walk?
Well, I don't know if this is polarizing. I'd like to see them bring back Sam Martin, because for being a late preseason addition, and the consistency you saw not only with him as a punter, but Tyler Bass having the best season of his career. We know how important holding is. I have no interest in seeing that shaken up. So unless he just gets a mega deal elsewhere, I hope the Bills bring him back.
Yeah, I mean, Sam Martin's on my list. I have a list of who's staying. Sam Martin's on there. I think you can get him basically for the minimum contract you can offer. He's not going to have a market elsewhere, or a very small market elsewhere. Why not come back to Buffalo, where he played well in his kind of spare time, and like you said, held very well for Tyler Bass. A few names, just throwing them out there, that I think are coming back, and some names Bills fans aren't going to like. Bobby Hart, he'll be a Bill next year. He's a Bill every year. He's essentially a cockroach. He refuses to die, which is perfectly fine by me. I mean, they used him. He could be, maybe he's their swing guard this year. Who knows? A couple other names. Dean Marlowe. Like, the Bills traded for Dean Marlowe. Dean Marlowe was happy to come back. He's just a vet guy that can play special teams. That's all he is. He's not a starting safety for the Bills. He's just a guy you bring back. He's competing for a roster spot in camp. I don't think he has much value elsewhere. He loves Buffalo. His wife loves Buffalo. Why not bring him back? Same thing with AJ Klein. I treat him the same way I treat Dean Marlowe, depth guy competing for a job at camp. And then there's 2 more names I'm going to throw out there. And these ones piss Bills fans off, or at least one of them will. Tywan Jones, I think he comes back. He's a Bills gunner. He's a captain. The Bills are set to lose 4 captains this year: Tyler Matakevich, Tywan Jones, Jordan Poyer, Tremaine Edmonds. You cannot lose 4 captains in 1 year. Bring one of them back, it's Tywan Jones. That pisses people off because they're like, he's a running back that can't run the ball. He's not a running back. He's a special teams player.
I love Tywan Jones, man.
Yeah, when I make depth charts this year, like I have an Excel sheet where I make depth charts. I literally added a new row that's just special teams players because I'm not putting these players that the Bills bring in as special teams guys any longer in their position. He's not a running back. He's never been a running back. He's always a special teams player. And then the last guy I just want to throw out there, Dane Jackson. So he's kind of a polarizing figure with Bills fans. Bills fans look at him as this guy that gets burned all the time, blah, blah, blah. I watched the whole entire season. I don't think Dane Jackson got burned all that much. What happened was he was super sticky in coverage, and then you'd have somebody like it wasn't Justin Jefferson, but someone like Justin Jefferson make a crazy catch. And it's like Dane is so close. If he can just improve a tad, just having him as a backup corner, I'm perfectly content with that. And someone the Bills can rotate in and they can trust. I don't think he's going to have a massive market elsewhere. The Bills did not tender him, and the tender was about $2.25 million. So if you can get him for $1.5 million, why not bring him back as basically your backup cornerback, your CB 4 or 5 in the Bills defense? So those are the guys that I think the Bills are actually going to look at and probably bring back on super cheap deals.
Yeah, I agree with all of those. And I will say, as far as Tywan Jones goes, I think it's interesting you didn't mention Tyler Matakevich, because I'm thinking we're sharing a brain here that this new age of the Bills paying Josh Allen like a franchise quarterback, you don't have the luxury of paying a special teams ace $4 million APY like he was last year. So unless his market value is way less than it has been in the past, I think he's gone. And that's why Tywan Jones makes a lot of sense to bring back. Bobby Hart, I understand, is a meme, but the value he brings to this team really, it goes overlooked because, one, we know they like to use him in 2 tight end sets. I think maybe they're going to try to get away from that a little bit, depending on what they do in free agency. But you're talking about a guy that, while he's not your primary backup at tackle, he can get you out of a game at 4 positions on the offensive line if you have a rash of injuries. You can only have so many guys active on game day. And to have a guy that has starting experience on 4 positions on the offensive line to get you out of a game is invaluable. And I agree completely he'll be back.
Yeah, this team definitely values versatility, so I would imagine Bobby Hart comes back. And I do agree mostly that Tywan Jones is not a running back, unless, of course, it's a wild card game against the Bills where he decides to just turn into one and just completely ruin the game for all of us. But, I'm not mad about that still. Don't worry. All right, well, gentlemen, we have reached the halfway mark here. Well, a little more than halfway. I think we're entering the 40s, but we're going to talk about some options that the Bills could take on offense and defense. And before I get there, shout out to everyone in the chat. Shout out to everyone watching again. Love that you guys are here. Love the contributions. Keep them coming. We're happy to, contribute to you and anything you say in any way you can. Just want to show our love. All right. So I didn't even have them on the list. I wanted to shock you guys with this one. It's not shocking at all. You guys are 100% sure that, or know that this is where this is going. I promised my friends back home that this is a name that we would talk about a little bit. He was, I'm sure everyone's totally not sick of talking about him. I'm sure everyone is totally not tired of hearing maybe they'll sign him, maybe they won't. But they were present at his workout yesterday. Apparently the workout went well. We don't know where he's going to go. But as far as if the money is right, are you paying Odell Beckham Jr. to come to the Bills?
In the history of workouts, has a workout ever gone bad? Like I remember Drew Henson a long time ago had a workout, and NFL executives were like, "Oh my God, this is the next franchise quarterback." So I think that's funny. But I mean, the interest is obviously there. Brandon Beane has not hid from that, and Von Miller obviously is gassing him up. And then the Bills were present for the workout, is our understanding. So they at least had a contingent there. They obviously have a need at receiver, whether it's competition with Gabe Davis or just more depth on their wide receiver depth chart. I think, like a lot of conversations we're going to get into on this show, it really does come down to money, and obviously the uncertainty of what version of Odell Beckham you're going to get. Is he the version we saw in the Super Bowl for the Rams prior to tearing his ACL, or is he a lesser than version? And that is going to be a tricky game for Brandon Beane to navigate when trying to figure out what the value is. I would say I'm a little less optimistic that the Bills will sign him, but I don't rule it out.
Oh, Odell Beckham. So here's the thing. He doesn't move the needle for me anymore. There was a time when he did, and last year, as all the rumors were kind of heating up, I was in on Odell. I was like, yeah, bring him in as that kind of last piece that pushes the team over the top. He just really doesn't do it for me anymore. One thing I'll say is people have an issue with Gabe Davis, and I'll say I'm probably more critical about Gabe Davis than most of the guys that cover one. But one of the biggest things that people harp on is, his catch percentage is so low. He has so many drops. Well, okay. So Gabe Davis's catch percentage last year was 51.6%. His career is 54.1%. All right. So I also just pulled up OBJ. So OBJ since 2019, here's his catch percentage by year: 55.6, 53.5, 53.7. So he essentially has the OBJ style, or sorry, Gabe Davis style catch percentage. Now, granted, he didn't have Josh Allen throwing him the football, but nonetheless, the Bills have Stephon Diggs, they have Gabe Davis, and let's say they had Odell Beckham. It doesn't solve the problem for me. The problem is the Bills need a slot wide receiver, a guy that you can trust play after play to get open and catch the football. And Odell Beckham isn't that guy for me. Like I have so many higher priority players than Odell Beckham. And I think he's just going to command too much money on top of that. Cause I think some team's going to be enamored with the star power of him. And that team is going to be none other than the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys are going to take Odell Beckham, the supposed Bills wide receiver at one point. That's the Bills wide receiver they're going to get, not Stephon Diggs. Like all their fans have this delusion they're getting.
Yes, I'm going to refrain from going down the Diggs road. However, when it comes to Odell Beckham Jr., I disagree that he wouldn't move the needle for me. I think he would, for the sole reason that you brought up his catch percentage. But I think Odell Beckham Jr., given the traction on him, given the concerns of his injury, I think he would probably be more suited for a limited slot role than he would be on the outside. But you could plug him to go up. You definitely could, and maybe take some slack off Davis if you want to test it. But I don't foresee him being like a burner on this team. I think his catch percentage would go up because he's going to be at a shorter range for Allen to hit, and he's more sure-handed in that regard. So I would be fine with Odell Beckham Jr. coming to the Bills if the money's right. My concern is the money isn't going to be right just because of the name, the notoriety, the hype for a player who has, in my opinion, no leverage, because even though he was doing fantastic in that playoff run and that Super Bowl, he got hurt. He tore his ACL again. It's not something that you could just scoff at and say he'll be fine this year. He's on the wrong side of 30 now. He's going to get older. That knee is going to be a question. And if a team puts too much on his plate, even if they're paying him like a receiver that deserves that role, that much money, it might bite you. So I would only take Odell Beckham Jr. if the money was probably similar to like maybe what Robert Woods just got, which I don't think it'll be. I think it'll be a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you think he could thrive in the slot, because if that is the case, then I my interest gets a little bit stronger, because I think the need for the Bills, like Uber mentioned, is they need a slot receiver. And then I also believe they need a long-term answer, whether that is Gabe Davis or just somebody else in the pipeline to challenge Gabe Davis. Odell Beckham doesn't check either of those boxes. So then the third option of something they need is just somebody who is plug and play, instant upgrade over Gabe Davis for sure, without question, that just makes this entire wide receiver group look better. I don't think that's Odell Beckham at this point either. So I'm not sure what box it checks. And then the other thing that just gives me pause, they already have Tre'Davious White coming off of an ACL injury, and that didn't go great last year. They're still concerned about that. They have Von Miller coming off of an ACL injury that they're going to be dealing with this year. Do they want another player that will be important on this team coming back from an ACL injury? I'm not quite sure they'd have the appetite for that.
Agreed. Completely agreed.
And I'll throw one more thing out there that drives me nuts with Odell Beckham, and how fans kind of drool over him at points. Yesterday in the workout, the like viral video that came out was that ridiculous one-hand catch that he had. Like, that's really cool. It was a really cool thing. My thing with Odell Beckham is just use two hands always. Yeah. His entire career in real games he played, he just goes up with one hand because he wants to. Like, go up with two. You'll catch it. It's easier to catch the ball with two hands. And Odell Beckham constantly goes with one hand. So when I saw him catch that ball with one hand, I thought, wow, that's neat, but you could have just put two hands out there and caught it. Like, it's no longer impressive to me to see one-hand catches, especially the gloves these guys are wearing are so freaking sticky. Like, of course he can catch it on one finger. There's glue on his glove. Like, just use two hands. Please, wide receivers, use two.
I'm for the two-hand movement as well. You know, contrary to popular belief, two hands is better than one when it comes to ball security. Well, there's others names on this list besides OBJ that we can get to. I'm going to start with one that I know, Josh, you love. He's the thumbnail of this episode today, probably the biggest name in this market, and that is Mr. Ben Powers, who is going to be 26 years old, or is 26 years old at the start of the season. Offensive guard, played for Baltimore. This was kind of his breakout year. In 17 games, allowed 0 sacks, 86.5 pass blocking grade, thanks PFF. He's projected 3 years, 28 mil, 9.4 million average. Now, I listened to Pro Ant's episode earlier the week where he was talking about Ben Powers, and one thing he brought up that I didn't know and looked more into and saw was that he's much more of like a pure pass protector than an athletic guard. He's not going to go down the field, and his run defense grade wasn't very good either. He's a statue. He's the guy that's going to, protect Allen, which is great, but that's really all you're getting out of it. But I want to protect Allen, and I think that's the biggest need of this team this offseason. So what is the consensus opinion on Ben Powers?
I'm actually not as big of a fan. I'm sorry if I misrepresented that to you. There's another idea out there that I think is in the same price range. Gotcha. I'm with you on my concerns about Ben Powers. I think he's good in basically a phone booth, as I like to say, but I don't know that he has the movement skills that translate to what the Bills like to do. I think he's somebody that would certainly be an upgrade over what they had last year in Roger Saffold. But for the number that he is being talked about on Spot Track, I think there's a couple other options out there in free agency that would interest me a little more than Ben Powers.
My bad. I think I missed it. Were you talking about Reisner?
I was talking about Reisner. Yeah.
I got it mixed up, so I apologize for that. So we'll get to him in a second. Yeah. Uber, want to hear your opinion on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take Ben Powers if the Bills can get him. I just think that he's going to get more money than we think. And again, the Bills are so cap strapped right now. Like I don't think. I tweeted this out actually very shortly before the show. The Dolphins, the Jets, the Patriots are all going to make splash moves this offseason. Every single one of them is going to make a move that we go, oh my gosh, they just did something crazy. The Bills aren't. Like, we just don't have any money. The splash move would be, I don't know, like the splash move would have been Robert Woods. And that's not even a splash. Like these other teams are going to make big moves. Like acquiring Aaron Rodgers is a big, big move. The Bills aren't doing anything remotely close to that. So when it comes to Ben Powers, yeah, I'd like him on the team. And I think that there is some future proofing the Bills with Ben Powers. You plug him in at one of the guards this year. And say Mitch Morris retires next year. In 2 years, you have your center and you can keep Bates at guard, let's say. I think the Bills kind of bargain basement shop and like, just throwing one name out there, Cam Irving. He's an offensive tackle. He played for the Panthers last year. He was known as, they called him the Icky Whisperer in Carolina because he made Icky Iwanu, the rookie guard, he made him better. Like he took Icky under his wing and made him better. So I look at somebody like Cam Irving where it's like, maybe he isn't going to play. Maybe he's a swing guy, but at a minimum, you let him kind of mentor a Spencer Brown, mentor Ryan Bates, mentor whoever you draft at the offensive line position. And you're not going to pay Cam Irving much, a guy that's played all 5 positions on the offensive line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And moving on, I want to talk about Reisner now. So 27, another guard out of Denver, 16 games, 3 sacks allowed, 72.6 pass blocking grade. He's projected 4 years, 38 million, 9.5 average. Now this is who I've seen some chatter in the chat. Let's talk about Reisner.
Big fan, been a consistent player. The 4 years he's been in the league, he is a better pass blocker than a run blocker, but he fits that athletic profile that the Bills have been slowly trying to build under Aaron Kromer. He is a good athlete, good in space. And just in general, I think that while I totally agree with Uber that the Bills are going to be bargain shopping in the clearance section this offseason, I do think that if they are going to make a splash, it could be at the guard position. And that's because, one, the tippy top of the guard market is not going to be anywhere near the tippy top of, say, the cornerback market or the edge market. You can still get up there without really strapping yourself for cap in the future. So if you're willing to go 10 APY on a Powers, on a Risner, on a Nate Davis, then you can spread that money out. It can be $3 or $4 million year one, and then push the money into the future when the Bills hope to have more cap relief. But specifically on Risner, he is my favorite idea of the guards. I think it solidifies that left guard spot next to Deion Dawkins. That really has been a rotating door since Richie Incognito left after the 2017 season.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up Richie Incognito just because he's the last good guard the Bills have had. Like the Bills have not had an above average guard since Incognito, which means essentially Josh Allen has played with a poor interior offensive line his whole career. My number one priority this offseason is the offensive line. I think the Bills attack that in the draft. I hope they attack that in the draft. If they go get a Reisner, if they go get a Ben Powers, if they go get somebody like that where they shore up that interior, I'm all for it. I know people have kind of been harping on the idea of replacing Spencer Brown, getting a different tackle out there to compete with Spencer Brown. I'd rather fix the middle of the line than the outside of the line or the right tackle position. So if it's Reisner, if it's Powers, I'll sign up for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm all in on protecting Josh Allen. Again, the Aaron Quinn movement, if you guys aren't familiar with it, it's protect Josh Allen. Anyone that can do that successfully, whether that's one of the top end guards or someone in the draft or someone on the low end of free agency, they shore up the line and they prevent the pressure. I'm all for it. Powers, Reisner, I probably butchered his name, so I apologize for that. But either way, I want someone there that's going to shore up that position. I am a fan of going for it in free agency because I think it's just one less need to get right in the draft, especially let's just say the Bills pick with what they have. They don't make any trades. They don't accrue any more draft capital. You are at a lot more pressure to get those picks right, at least in my eyes, because when it's so limited and you can only do so much, they're going to have to try and nail it. And I feel like if you take the pressure of getting a guard off that and you have that shored up from free agency, then you can focus on other needs and that pressure becomes a little less just because that position might, because you can't predict the future, be shored up. And moving on. Oh, go on.
Yeah, just real quick. All due respect to Ike Bacher, who I am a fan of. In my opinion, guard is the one position that the Bills absolutely have to find a starter this offseason that isn't currently in their building. Any other position they have needs at, even if they lose Poyer or Edmonds, there's at least somebody on their roster that you can talk yourself into being somebody that grows into that role. And that's where I kind of lean with you, Joe, is I don't think Brandon Beane wants to go into a draft knowing he has to find a starter in that draft. Whereas if he addresses it in free agency, it gives him the flexibility to go best player available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love the idea that when you are at that spot, there isn't the panic to take someone, maybe even reach for someone at a certain position. And I think the Bills have kind of talked about it in past drafts, like with the Elam draft. If Elam wasn't there, they were going to trade back. They didn't want to just settle and take someone or reach for someone that had later value because they just needed that position. I think they'll value being in a spot where whoever's on the board, we just want what's best. We don't need to worry about plugging a hole because we have someone ready to go. God forbid this doesn't work out. But in speaking of workouts and not talking about OBJs, I want to talk about some receivers here. Now, I put a bunch of names down here. I could go over all of them. There's one I wanted to bring up specifically. If you couldn't tell who it is, it's the guy that I wrote in all caps because this is the most ridiculous idea. Mentioned in the Cover One chat a few weeks ago. I forgot who pitched it. But Mike Gesicki is a tight end. 27 from Miami. Mike Gesicki is not a good blocker. He is basically a slot receiver, a big one. I think he measures at 6'6". He had a down year in McDaniel's offense. It wasn't the one that he wanted, especially in a contract year. They didn't really utilize him. But again, I think that's just because his game is really more as a receiver. And he's projected to get 4 years, 32 mil, 8.2 million projection. I personally, this is just me, don't think he's going to get that much. What's your guys' take on that?
Yeah, I don't know. It really depends on if you view him as a good enough receiver that you can overcome the fact that even though he's a tight end, he's only going to catch the ball for you. I've seen the Gesicki thing floated out there by Bills fans, and I totally understand the appeal of it. The moving chess piece. How do you match up with him? My only pause on that and why I would stop short of saying that really interests me is, in theory, the Bills had a lot of moving chess pieces last year on their offense, Naheem Hines, James Cook, and we didn't necessarily see them utilized in ways that we all envisioned when they were acquired. So I don't know that I personally want to sit here for another offseason daydreaming about how Ken Dorsey's going to draw up plays for this hybrid wide receiver tight end and Mike Gesicki, where I'd rather maybe just see them focus their attention on a true wide receiver, a true slot. But I get the appeal for sure because he is a force when he has the ball in the air.
Yeah, Gesicki's an interesting player. Like before the Bills had extended Dawson Knox, I had some interest in finding a way to when Gesicki eventually hit free agency, getting him on the Bills. But now with Knox extended, and again, to Joe's point, one of the knocks on Gesicki, he's not really a good blocker. He's actually not even really that, he's not really heavy enough. At 247, that's a below average of most tight ends measure. But as a big slot receiver, I'm just enamored. I'm enamored, and I loved when Cole Beasley was the Bills slot. Just this little guy that could find openings that Josh always knew would be open. I have to see Gesicki be able to do that on a consistent basis before I could sign off on having him as a slot, like having a big slot receiver. It's interesting because it's just another tool in the toolbox for Ken Dorsey, but Ken Dorsey seemingly didn't use all the tools in his toolbox last year, so I'm not necessarily trusting that he's going to use them all this year. So I would tend to align with the idea of finding a typical normal slot guy like a Zay Flowers, like a Josh Downs, someone like that in the draft that you could put in that slot position that I'd like better. But Gesicki would be interesting. I do wonder though if he and Joe. I might disagree with you a little bit on this. He might get paid. He might not. I really don't know. There was a report that came out from the combine. I don't remember the reporter said a name that was getting floated a lot was Gesicki. There's teams that are interested in him if they can find out a way to use him. I think that's the biggest thing with him. Can you find a way to use him?
Yeah, I mean, if it's that one-dimensional slot role, which I think it really would be, maybe someone will overpay. Again, it goes back to who's going to be the team that has enough cap that can justify spending more than they should on a player that's going to give you one type of offense. So. Maybe I could be wrong. This is more of a pipe dream. I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah.
But so obviously I want to talk about defensive free agents soon with the limited time we have. But before we do, you guys have penned some names down here. So if there's anyone from this list that I wrote, you wrote, whatever that you want to bring up now, feel free to.
Yeah, so I'll start. My favorite idea for the Bills is Damian Harris, former running back from the New England Patriots. I think he would be a nice complement to James Cook. He's a guy that has been part of a rotation his entire career. So even though he is 4 years into the league, he has just over 400 carries on his resume. In 2020 and 2021, he was PFF's second highest graded running back in the league. Had a down year in 22, dealt with some leg injuries, ended up ultimately losing the job to Ramondre Stevenson. But I think he's a guy that you could buy low on. His stock is down right now and get a big boost to your running game. And then just quickly, I want to mention, I love the Paris Campbell idea. I don't want to step on somebody else's toes because I know it was mentioned in the sheet, but I think his skill set, the speed he has, the fact that he played over 70% of the snaps in the slot for the Colts last year, that checks a lot of boxes for me as a guy who really came on last year, but his track record of being a player that couldn't stay healthy might work against him in free agency, and you can get a bargain there.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Damian Harris idea a lot. I wonder what his contract's going to be like too, because you're right, his stock's down, but does someone bite on the potential that he has? Because when he was kind of rolling with the Patriots, when he was at the peak of his game, he was really, really good. The two guys that I kind of have on my list here, and sorry I didn't add them to the actual sheet. I'm going to go Braxton Berrios, and I'm not even going Braxton Berrios for his production on offense, though I think he could kind of be a better version of Isaiah McKenzie out of the slot in the same kind of speed role. Berrios is one of the best return men in football. And if the Bills are going to move on from Nyheim Hines, I don't know if that truly will happen, but there is pretty big cap savings there to do so. Maybe you get Berrios for cheap and you fill both return roles and you still get that kind of speedy Isaiah McKenzie player. And the other player, which I'm interested to see if we keep doing the Carolina connection, is Trey Turner, the guard. I think he was most recently with the Commanders. He's a free agent right now. He's not the best guard in the world, but he's a guy that you could put into that spot and honestly would probably be an upgrade over Roger Saffold. Not a massive upgrade, but Trey Turner was drafted by Carolina when Brandon Beane was in Carolina. So Brandon Beane does have a little bit of insight there on Turner. So maybe he's a guy you see Buffalo try to bring in. And I will say there was some rumor, some speculation during the 2020 offseason that the Bills were poking around Trey Turner, trying to see if they could get him to Buffalo.
Could see it happening. Another name that was put on here, I don't know who put it down, Kelvin Beachum.
Oh yeah, that was me. Kelvin Beachum, and another name maybe George Fant. That checks a need for me because I don't necessarily think the Bills are going to be overly aggressive in trying to find competition for Spencer Brown. I think there's still a lot of belief in that building that he can grow into the starting right tackle of the future. But Kelvin Beachum is just good enough to come in and compete with Brown to help him be the best version of himself, but also massively upgrade the swing tackle situation. So you aren't in a situation where you're playing the Patriots and David Quessenberry's falling over 4 times trying to block a defensive lineman. Yeah. Kelvin Beachum still gets really high marks in pass blocking on PFF. Not the best run blocker, has a lot of starting experience on the left and right side. And according to Spot Track, PFF, he could come in under $4 million APY. And it's not a sexy name, but man, if Deion Dawkins has to miss a month, you're going to feel so good about having an experienced left tackle out there to kind of get you through that time period.
Agreed completely with that. And, again, protect Josh Allen. I agree with a lot of the analysis for pretty much each of the names you said. I do love Damian Harris. I would love the idea of Harris and Gesicki somehow being in Buffalo so they can just stop bullying us when we play them. But
Sure.
just two good options for offense. One might be expensive. Harris, I don't think would command that much money. Beacham again, cheap veteran tackle would really, if you can find any way to protect Allen on a much cheaper deal, I'm with it. So let's go with defense for the last part of our show today. Now, I'll let you guys take the reins on who you want to bring up here. Any names that popped out for you that you're a huge fan of that think might be realistic for the Bills?
So I'll start. I think that the Bills might be a little sneaky aggressive in the edge market. I just because one, they have to bridge the gap between Von Miller coming back. If we just want to use the Trey White timeline, Trey White didn't come back until Thanksgiving, and he had the same time frame on when he injured his ACL on Thanksgiving. So if you figure that they're going to be without Von Miller for a month or two, I could see them being somewhat aggressive in the veteran edge rusher market. Names that pop to me, I would love Justin Houston. I think he could mirror a lot of what Jerry Hughes brought to this team. He still rushes the passer at a very high level. There's been some rumors out there that the Bills have been tied to Frank Clark. That would be interesting. Another guy that really plays well in big spots, although some of his production does tail off during the regular season. And then Melvin Ingram, a guy that for whatever reason plays his best ball whenever he sees the Bills uniforms on the other sideline.
Mm-hmm.
Those are three names that would be interesting to me if the Bills could get them at a reasonable cost.
Yeah, I'll just give two positions and two players at each position. So I'm going to go linebacker and safety for obvious reasons. My two linebackers. Okay, so what in the last, I think it was in the Buffalo Roundup with cover one where I said this. One thing the Bills kind of need at middle linebacker or might desire at middle linebacker is size. Tremaine Edmonds' length and size is very important to the Bills' zone scheme because he can drop back and he just takes up so much space just because of how he was created as a human. So I'm looking at two bigger guys here, and that's Alex Anzalone from the Lions and Zach Cunningham. What was he on? He was on the Titans, right? Yeah. Both 6'3", both 240, both athletic guys that kind of have proven themselves in the NFL. Anzalone proved himself this past season. I think he had close to 100 tackles, if not more than that. Looked really good for Detroit. I actually tweeted this out, and a couple people that were at the Lions game, a couple Bills fans were like, yeah, that guy flashed all day when I was there in person. So I'm high on Anzalone. No one really is mentioning him at all. I'd be interested to see if he comes. And Cunningham, I think, was just cut by the Titans. He's coming off a 4-year, $58 million deal. He's not going to get that number. He got hurt this past year. I wonder how high his market's going to be or how high his cost is going to be in relativity to Tremaine Edmonds. But two guys at linebacker, and then I'll just do two quick ones at safety. So I'm kind of going out there a little bit here. Jabril Peppers, a little bit of a positionless safety, a guy that you can kind of move around the field. He hasn't lived up to the hype that he had coming out of college, but maybe you can get a little bit of Poyer-esque play from him where you can sit him back deep and you don't have to worry about him getting beat back deep, but you can also bring him into the box if you need to. You can blitz him. He can kind of play all over the field. And I think the Bills need a little bit of something different. And I think Peppers could be that. And the other guy I'll go with is Carl Joseph. So this is also a name that no one's talking about. He's been hurt for 2 years now. He's only played 2 games the past 2 seasons. Let's say he's healthy. Let's say his workouts go well, blah, 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 blah. He's known as a guy that's high football IQ, loves the sport, has athleticism to kind of burn. He's a guy I'm really interested in filling that Poyer role. Like, people forget Poyer when he left the Browns, when the Bills had brought him in, had a lacerated kidney. People thought his career was over. He was just kind of coming into his own at that point in time. He came to Buffalo. Buffalo kind of reinvented him, and Poyer took off as one of the best safeties in the NFL. Carl Joseph is significantly older than Poyer was at that point in time, but people think his career's over. He's going to be super cheap. You can probably get him on a very low guarantee, and maybe you bring him into Buffalo, and at least for 2 or 3 years, he's a bridge guy that you can sit back there and he can fill that Jordan Poyer role.
Quality options. I'm for any of those, really. I want to contribute one linebacker that I don't think we mentioned yet. He's a name that has been thrown around isn't even the right word, but Levante David, I mean,
Mhm.
to me, that's the no-brainer option if Edmonds walks. A year, $9.7 million projection, pure veteran, amazing coverage linebacker, and grades well in run defense as well. He played all 17 games at 34 years old, 124 tackles. To me, that's check. That's got to be priority one. If you're talking about a linebacker to fill the gap that Edmonds will leave if he walks, this is the guy to do it. Consummate professional, Super Bowl champion, can fly all over the field. Doesn't look like he's 34 years old, ageless wonder. Just has played that Mike role before. I think he's the guy that, when I don't want to say when, I don't want to speak in absolutes, but if you lose Tremaine Edmonds, this is a guy who can come in and make you feel like you never lost Tremaine Edmonds. Maybe not by the size, but maybe just because of the leadership, the knowledge of the game, the ability to process. He has it all, and I just would be stunned if Edmonds walks, if this team does not decide to go for him. And then one final name I'll mention, also a safety, Ryan Neal. I watched the film that Eric put up. I love Ryan Neal. I love his speed. I love what he can bring to the table. 14 games, 2 picks, the forced fumble, 85.7 coverage grade. They only have him on Spot Track a year, $2.4 million projection at 27. When you're coming off that really good year in Seattle with a really good defense, I mean, if that is the projection that he's expected to get somehow, I'm taking a flyer on that 100%. I'm giving him that spot. I'm letting him compete. I think this kid could be great. If you're talking about the concept of how we found Poyer, plucking him from a different team, putting him in that role and he became a star, I think this kid's a little further beyond that as far as like what he actually is. I shouldn't call him a kid. I'm 26. He's a year older than me. But if you're talking about taking someone from a system, bringing him in and letting him be a star, I think he's further developed than Poyer was at that point in his career, but he would be an extreme contributor. And he's got that thumper mentality, that motor to him that I think would be welcomed in this Bills defense. So any final names you guys want to mention before we wrap it up today?
I really like the Jabril Peppers idea that Uber brought up. I think he's that moving chess piece. In a lot of ways, I think he's an upgrade over what they've been trying to do with Saran Neal, where a guy that can be a stalwart on special teams, but you can specialize him on defense given the matchup. And then we've just seen now Leslie Frazier's gone, but since Sean McDermott and then Leslie Frazier showed up, they have maximized defensive back. So that is a mold of clay that I'd like to see them really get a chance to get there. I think the Levante David thing is interesting because the Bills are kind of at a like choose your own adventure path with linebacker if they lose Edmonds. Do they want that 1 to 2 year? I don't want to call him a Band-Aid because he's still a high-end player, but kind of the bridge linebacker to Terrell Bernard developing or rookie draft pick X developing. That would be your Eric Kendricks, Levante David, Bobby Wagner route. Or are they going to dip into free agency and try to find more of a long-term answer like a Drew Tranquil or a Jermaine Pratt? Now, Jermaine Pratt has a lot of the similarities, skill sets as Tremaine Edmonds. He has length. He was PFF's highest graded pass coverage linebacker, but that's a situation where you could see his market get up over 10, 11, 12 million APY. And then you're just left asking yourself, well, why don't we just sweeten the pot a little bit more and keep Tremaine? So what they do at linebacker, if they lose Tremaine Edmonds, well, I think will set the tone for their entire offseason, really how aggressive they are in attacking off-ball linebacker.
So I don't remember if it was Josh or Joe who said this earlier, but mentioned the idea of losing Poyer and Tremaine. You're losing kind of your 2 of your stalwarts on defense, 2 of your leaders on defense, and 2 captains in all reality, and your play caller. I think it was Joe called them the quarterbacks of the defense. Bringing Levante David in kind of helps mitigate that, right? Like, and I think this is one thing I'm worried about where, hey, you draft a middle linebacker. Hey, you go get a young young linebacker in free agency. Maybe you want that veteran option like a Levante David that you can bring in and you know that he knows what he's doing. You know he can call plays. You kind of have to teach him the defense, but a veteran like that should be able to learn it. That's kind of interesting to me and something I hadn't thought of before today. But one thing I'm going to do, which is completely contrary to what I just said, is suggest that people join the Balin Spector committee like me and Eric Turner from Cover One. Now, this is a big long shot, is Balin Spector. So it was 7th round draft pick last year. No one's really talking about him. He was very good at Clemson, crazy good instincts. He tested really, really well at the combine last year. He posted a 9.13 RAS, which is a athletic score ranked from 0 to 10. 9.13 is absolutely elite. I wouldn't be stunned if Balin Spector's the Bills option at middle linebacker. And I think it's going to piss Bills fans off if that's the case, but that kid could be sneaky good. At a minimum, I think he's Tyler Matakevich's replacement on special teams.
It's funny because a few weeks ago we talked about the sophomore class. You were on that show, and I didn't put
Mm,
Spectre on the list. He was not there.
mhm.
Terrell Bernard was topical because you wrote the article. I didn't put Spectre on that list. It would be hilarious irony for me if he ends up becoming the Mike and ends up being really good, and I did not
Yeah,
mention him at all. But maybe I was protecting him, and I will totally switch that narrative if that happens. So,
exactly.
I think
guys,
it's reasonable. Linebacker is a position you can find, and I feel like we wouldn't be doing a service if we didn't mention at least one last Carolina player because we know the Carolina path.
true.
Just one name to keep an eye on, and I'm going to butcher his last name, Matthew Ioannidis, the defensive tackle who spent some time in
Oh,
Washington, would have familiarity with Al Holcomb last year in Carolina. This really is if the Bills do make the move and trade Ed Oliver. I think this is a guy that can provide some interesting pass rush up the middle. He's had seasons where he's had 8 or 9 sacks from the defensive tackle position. He's not going to be Ed Oliver, but I think he could be a discount Ed Oliver at a much cheaper cost. Familiarity with Al Holcomb. That's just a name to keep an eye on if and when they do pull the trigger on trading Ed Oliver.
Yeah, it's good to know that there could be a contingency option, especially from the Carolina pipeline, which is inevitable at this point.
Mhm.
That should you trade Ed and get his money off the books, now you're allocating some of that to a cheaper option that could fill that hole. Might even be great. I mean, like when Daquan Jones got signed last year, I saw the name. I remember exactly where I was. I was at a concert and my phone got the notification. I was like, huh, nice. I didn't know too much. And now I'm telling you he's one of our best players on the defensive line.
yeah.
That could be the case again. I mean, this guy, I don't know much about. Is it Ionitis?
Chris
It's
in chat has
Ioannidis.
been kind enough to give us the
I oh
pronunciation.
I
Ioannidis. Oh, he says I think. We'll trust you, Chris. Ioannidis.
I trust Chris. I like
Yeah.
I owe Bill Nye the science guy this, but getting a cheaper option that could have that kind of same presence that Daquan brought and be effective and disruptive is something that, every team dreams of. If that happens again with McDermott being former Carolina coach, inheriting the defense, bringing in a former Carolina player, I don't know if they ever crossed, but someone that at least, there's some familiarity with, especially if he teams back up with Jones, could be a plug and play guy. I am all for it. And on that note, gentlemen, we got to wrap it up today. This was a freaking awesome show today, guys. I was having a blast. I don't know about you. I don't know how you're feeling.
Yeah, this was
I
good.
loved
This
it.
was real good.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you both joining me again today. If you have anything you want to plug right now, plug it.
Well, I just want to appreciate the whole Cover One team. It's an honor to be on with you guys. I'm a big fan of what you guys do. I follow you all on Twitter. You're a great voice for the community, and I think you guys cover the Bills in a very unique way that has certainly helped people like me become more knowledgeable in the X's and O's. So I do want to send that compliment out there. I am from Built in Buffalo. I have this podcast, Bills Chat. My partner Luca has been in chat a little bit. We're growing. We're going to hit our 1-year anniversary here soon. We put our audio podcast out every Monday. We're live every Friday with Bills Chat Live. Would love if you check us out. Bills Chat Pod on Twitter.
Yeah, so I'm over at Cover One doing some written articles. I haven't done one in a minute. I have some ideas here over the next couple weeks that I'll look into. All over Twitter at Uber Hansen, and just plugging my next piece of content, which will be coming out Monday morning. So that's what, March 13th. Is that what Monday is? Yeah, March 13th. It's a post for the NFL subreddit. It's called Buffalo Bills 32 Teams in 32 Days. Last year's post was 38 pages long. It's the most comprehensive recap of the 2022 NFL season you will find. I have a couple other people writing with that with me, so I'm not a psychopath that literally wrote 38 pages myself, but got to finish that this weekend, and that'll get posted live. I'll tweet that out too on Monday.
Is there any way we can convince you to leave the Bengals playoff game out?
No, that's in there. That's in there. It's
Okay.
short though. It's short.
Okay.
It's short.
Okay, I appreciate it. Okay.
I mean, you were the one that said that you didn't think it was as bad as it seemed. I mean, they still lost,
Oh, I
but
know.
like
Yeah.
you were, that's certainly a thing where it's like that's a good point of discussion. But everyone who's watching today, first off, I gotta tell you, like, read Uber's articles and watch Josh's podcast. Like, I tuned in last night to hear their free agency show. It was amazing. It was solid. Everything was brought up. I was chiming in. It was a lot of fun. They're very responsive. And Uber, you're just far and away one of the best writers on this network. Like, it is so much fun to read your stuff because it's so insightful. You're bringing up things and changing my perspective. I mean, again, I'll keep referencing the Terrell Bernard article. Like, it was just like the timing of it and the argument you made changed my opinion too. So please check out their content. For all of you joining today, I really appreciate you watching. Unfortunately, next weekend, I am going to be away for my anniversary weekend, 2 years. Let's go. Shout out to Cease. And then the weekend after, I will be back with another show. But for today, I want to thank all of you for watching, contributing in any way. If you are listening to this after we went live, I appreciate you listening. Thank you all so much. Go Bills, and I will see you soon.